Indigenous people across this country are angry, they're heartbroken, and I know Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians alike know that we have to do better.
My brother did not deserve this. This has to stop. Indigenous people, our lives are meaningful. We are human beings. We are irreplaceable. Every human being is irreplaceable.
A jury of his peers declared a not guilty verdict for Saskatchewan farmer Gerald Stanley. The 56-year-old said his pistol fired accidentally, killing 22-year-old Colton Boushie. The jury believed Mr. Stanley's account of a chaotic theft underway on his farmyard involving Mr. Boushie and 3 friends in the aftermath of protests across the country, outraged that an all-white jury did not convict Mr. Stanley. GoFundMe campaigns have been started for both the victim and the acquitted. The racial tensions in this case changing political agendas in Ottawa as the Boushie family went looking for answers. Only one thing is clear. Lives on both sides of the pain are shattered. Today on Context, we look for answers for healing. I'm Lorna Dueck.
I'm Sheldon Neal.
And I'm Molly Thomas.
And this is Context. Pastor Tyrone Byrd grew up on Red Pheasant Reserve, where Colton Boushie's family is from. Pastor Byrd, thank you for being with us. You felt compelled that your Christian love needed to go in and speak with the Boushie family. What happened in that exchange?
My wife is a band counselor for Moosomin First Nation, where I'm on today. And she had got to go to a big FSIN meeting, and I got to stand up and say a prayer. And then from there, I got to speak to late Colton Boushie's grandma. And then from there, she had said that no one had wanted to go and pray for her family. So that had gave us an opportunity to go and pray with the family about 3 or 4 days later.
What needs to happen now? You see the big wound that this has opened in our country between us as treaty people, my white people, your people. What's your counsel to us?
For us, is there needs to be a repentance and just a humility, a return to being humble, and we just pray that God's will and will pour through our land. So we just pray that there'll be a repentance also.
You actually brought a white pastor with you. Your work with the Aboriginal people, your people, is actually in partnership with us, the white people, isn't it?
Yes. So we have a partnership with Territorial Drive Alliance Church and also Interact Missionaries, and we got to bring our Interact missionary with us to when we went to see Colton Boushie's family. And then he got to sit there and say, that's not how all white people think. And on behalf of white people and myself being a white person, he said, I would like to give you my apologies.
This may yet be a great springboard for healing, might it?
Yes.
All right. Pastor Tyrone Byrd there in Moosomin, thank you very much for being on the program.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Molly, you've got a great interview coming up with the chief, but your own roots run deep in Saskatchewan. What do we know and what have you experienced there about watching the racial tensions?
Well, born and raised in Regina, proud of my home province, but Lorna, I can't ignore the racism that I've seen my Aboriginal friends and neighbors go through. I'll tell you about one instance. This woman that told me when she was a young girl, Aboriginal woman, playing with her white friend, and when the father came out, she would run into the backseat of the car and duck down every time because God forbid that a white daughter play with an Aboriginal daughter. That's how deep that runs. I can tell you about prominent Aboriginal educated people that walk into stores and feel like they're being watched and followed the entire time. We pride ourselves on multiculturalism in Canada, but there is a deep divide, there's deep mistrust, and that impacts people's quality of life.
I called an Aboriginal pastor, I called a white pastor to get ready for this show. Their opinions on how people were getting along in North Battleford were completely opposite. The white pastor thought, I think we're okay. The Aboriginal pastor said, we're completely broken. We're just crestfallen, and it's like square one is starting all over again for us. Okay, Molly, the statistics don't lie. They have been shocking. The child poverty rates are the second worst in the country.
On reserves specifically.
On reserves. The highest proportion of Indigenous people are in our prisons. It's vastly overrepresented. And in Saskatchewan alone, dozens of missing and murdered Aboriginal women.
Yeah, those should shock the country. Those are shocking statistics. And remember, Lorna, that 1 in 10 Aboriginal people in all of Canada live in Saskatchewan. And that specific community where the Gerald Stanley trial took place, North Battleford, it's 22% Aboriginal. And yet, on that jury, there was no visible minority that seemed to be apparent. And so that's where this public outcry has come from. It has really raised the question, is there racism in this situation? Okay,
we are calling this treaty people because we are treaty people. We have signed a treaty with our Indigenous Canadian. Actually, they're broader than Canadian. That's how they see themselves. Okay, you're going to hear some great Indigenous voices coming up on the show. Okay, Molly.
All right, we'll start things off in Treaty 4 territory, Regina, Saskatchewan, where we find Chief Cadmus Delorme. And he is the leader of the Cowessess First Nation, which is about 2 hours east of the capital city. Now, Chief Delorme, you marched this past weekend with hundreds of people in Regina. Thousands, of course, did that coast to coast. What was that like as a leader at such a tense time as this?
Hi, Molly. It was there was a lot of feelings there. When the decision came Friday night, I'm a very optimistic bridge builder kind of thinker, and when I heard the verdict, it was kind of set me into a deep thought, and I just felt obligated that I had to be at this rally, this gathering in Regina. When I went there, I just went as just anybody else would. I'm a chief, but I just stood in the audience, didn't really tell the organizers I was there, and someone spotted me out, and they asked me to come up and share a few words, and I never realized how much emotion I had in this until the mic was in front of me, and a very calm, cool speaker, and I kind of raised my voice, but not in a mean way, just in a passionate way. So I needed to be there.
And you spoke to the masses, saying that Canada needs a justice overhaul. What does that look like in Saskatchewan?
Well, right now in Saskatchewan, you take the top 260 decision makers, in it could be right from justice to education, and there's less than 4% Indigenous background in those positions. And those positions are really key in order to bring the TRC forward, to bridge the First Nation and non-First Nation in all the treaty territories in Saskatchewan. And when we're 18% of this province and we're about 4% in those positions, it creates challenges. And this weekend, a card was pulled that, some are saying it's racism, some are saying it's inequality, some are saying the justice system. Overall, it definitely has to be looked at, picked apart, and put back together.
Cadmus, you talked about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation that is happening on a national level. I'm seeing so much anger, though, online. Is that possible after a verdict like this?
The TRC will move forward. A verdict like this does you step back a few steps, but this is a snapshot in time. It's 2018. We're all going to share one common thing, and we share this land together. And moving forward, in this snapshot in time, we need a lot of reconciliation. We need a lot of truth talks in this province. If we want the next generation to be able to pull into a yard and ask for help, there shouldn't be ill feelings towards that. I'm a bridge builder thinker. I never went to residential school. I was raised by residential school survivors. I know my mom and dad were a part of the TRC writing. So I take that TRC as my constitution as an individual to make sure that we implement it, all 94. Number 45 of the TRC is talk about the doctrine of discovery, talk about the UNDRIP. Those are things that policy has to address. So I am.
Cadmus, I have to ask, you're a young leader, right? A young chief, a bridge builder, as you say, perhaps more optimistic than the elders that have come before you that have experienced just racism that we can't even fathom. How do you bridge this divide of respecting those elders, but also trying to move forward in integration and peace with the rest of Canadians?
That's a really good question. I take the passion and the pain, the positive stories, the negative stories, and every one of them have a lesson learned in them. And I focus on the lesson learned. You kind of sometimes have to step back from the feelings part of it and just more, there's something like we can all learn in this situation. And so when I take those learning tools, I run with them. And no matter which meeting I'm at, what TV camera I'm in front of, what community event I'm at, I will always show that what our ancestors fought for as Indigenous people, what our ancestors expected us to be in 2018, that I'm going to be above that mark. And those are the kind of drives that I use. And I use my ears a lot. My mom says you got to use your best friends more than your worst enemy. So I don't try to talk too much.
That's good advice in a very tense situation. Thank you so much, Chief Delorme, for being with us.
Thank you.
That was Chief Cadmus Delorme. That was the leader of the Cowessess First Nation.
Trials are meant to deliver social peace, wrote Toronto defense lawyer David Butt about the Stanley trial in the Globe and Mail. Mr. Butt calls the Bushy verdict a miscarriage of justice. He joins us from a courtroom in Peterborough. David, the accused did get a jury of his peers, all white people. What was wrong with that?
Yeah, I think, Lorna, if one takes a broader look at a number of factors that were in play, then you can see how this becomes problematic. The first thing to keep in mind, as lawyers often say, and the justice system takes very seriously, justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. What that means is that there is a very significant appearances component to justice. So whether they got the right answer on the evidence is important, but it's only one aspect of a case. It has to not only be fair, it has to look fair. So if we then turn to this issue of appearances, we have an area of Saskatchewan with a very deep and well-documented history of colonialist mistreatment of Indigenous peoples as the backdrop, the social backdrop. Second thing is we have a contemporary social reality where relations between Indigenous people and settlers is strained. Then the third factor is we have a situation where a white farmer is accused of shooting to death a young Indigenous person. The next factor we have is that during jury selection, the lawyer for the accused person deliberately excluded every Indigenous-looking person. So in terms of how the jury selection unfolded, actively sought out and achieved an all-white jury, and then that all-white jury acquitted. So if you take all of those factors together, the appearance from the perspective of the Indigenous community, which is a very important perspective, and indeed, given the outpouring we've seen after the verdict from a much broader segment of Canadian society than the Indigenous community, has come to the conclusion that those appearances are just unacceptable.
All right, so that is well established now, and because of that, the Bushy family is getting unprecedented victim access in Ottawa, meetings with the Prime Minister, the Justice Minister within a week of the trial's outcome. What's going to be the effect of that?
I'm hopeful that the effect of that is that there is change that addresses the composition of juries. And I say that very broadly. And I also want to say that which is very important here, is that everybody in that trial, the defense lawyers, the Crown, the judge, played by the existing rules. So what we have seen by the widespread and very deep emotional outcry against what happened is that the existing rules need to be improved. So I'm hopeful that federal justice officials, led by the Minister of Justice and the Prime Minister, will consult with their provincial counterparts to address the very difficult but very important issue of how to ensure that juries are representative of the diversity of a community, because that's the crucial appearances problem that's undermining the quality of verdicts in cases like this.
All right, David Butt, thank you very much for joining us and your insights into this case.
My pleasure, Lorna.
That was criminal defense attorney David Butt. He joined us from Peterborough. Still ahead, First Nations movement Idle No More is once again in the headlines after the stunning Colton Boushie verdict declares farmer Gerald Stanley not guilty. And prominent reconciliation advocate Negan Sinclair hung his head in disbelief after this verdict. He even said there was no hope. How does he feel now? Molly Thomas finds out.
Billionaire Elon Musk and his SpaceX program successfully launched one of his red-hot Tesla Roadsters into space, destined for Mars. We delve into the new frontier of private space travel. That's coming soon on Context.
We have now a voice from the activist movement Justice for Colton, who is charging across Canada with her message. Erica Lee has been involved with the Boushie family for months now, founding their GoFundMe page that has now raised really over $120K. She joins me now. Erica, let's start here. Could you outline why you think this decision was an injustice in your estimates?
I remember going to the preliminary hearing and watching the evidence in the courtroom, watching the family be exposed, being made to relive the death of Colton again, over again, seeing the photos of his body on the ground. It was left there for 24 hours after he was shot. The fact that he was shot in the back of the head. And the defense that Gerald Stanley put forth was that he was defending his property and his family. And of course, we know that there was no violence done. Colton and his friends didn't do any violence to the family. It was simply a fear. It was a fear of a young Native man coming onto their property. And before they even knew why they were coming onto the property, basically there was a scramble and he was shot and he was killed. So to be acquitted of that crime, to not even be charged with the fact that now Colton is gone and taken from us, is such a violation to me, and it's such a disappointment. We thought we couldn't be disappointed anymore, but it hurts every time something is taken from us.
What are your thoughts on the GoFundMe Gerald Stanley Support Fund that is being equally in support of quite strongly? What are your thoughts when you see that there's such a strong discourse happening opposite of the table?
Mm-hmm. I remember my frustration when I first saw it and how much it hurt, because it took us a really long time to raise our money. It took us over 5 months now. It's been up. And so it hurt, and it felt like sort of a punch to the gut to realize not only do we not have political power, we don't have as much like monetary power as a lot of people who are farmers or a lot of people who are white in Saskatchewan. So our donations came from like $5 here and there from people who didn't have a despair necessarily. But to me, that meant a lot. It meant a lot that people who don't have much are still willing to give to this. And I stopped looking at Gerald Stanley's page because we asked GoFundMe to take it down. But I know in the past that they've not taken down pages for example, George Zimmerman, who shot and killed Trayvon Martin, who was also acquitted of that murder. And they kept that funding page up. He made lots of money. But I think moving forward, I realized no matter how much money he gets, it won't heal him. It won't make him immune or innocent in this case. And I know that he and his family will always know that they left the farm alive that day and Colton Boushie didn't.
Wow. Erica Lee, thank you so much for your time. Our thoughts and prayers continue to go to the family. Thank you for your time.
It was so much.
That was Erica Lee, chief activist and strategist behind the hashtag Justice for Colton GoFundMe account. Thanks so much for your time.
Our next guest says the verdict to acquit Gerald Stanley in the Colton Boushie killing left him hopeless. Dr. Negan Sinclair teaches Native Studies at the University of Manitoba. Dr. Sinclair, you were struggling. You were struggling to find hope on Friday. Has anything changed?
Yeah, well, Boja, thanks for having me. It's definitely a tough 96 hours since that time. It's been hard to find hope, but remarkably, there's been in the resilience of Indigenous peoples and the kind of stubborn belief in that Canada can change and grow, and what you hope is that there's that will spread more. I've heard from many Canadians as well. I've been actually kind of inspired by just the cacophony of response. I've been getting tons of emails and messages, sort of reminding me that to be hopeful is inherently to be Indigenous, and then second is to truly believe that Canadians can change.
Said that in a beautiful way. Your father, Senator Murray Sinclair, Manitoba's first Aboriginal judge, wrote a poem that is spreading like wildfire online. And I want to bring that up for our viewers. In it, he grieves for mothers treated like criminals, for youth who have no hope, and for elders who have seen this before. What do you grieve for the most when it comes to this situation?
Yet another difficult conversation with my children about why people are so upset, and particularly why our relatives are so feeling. It's not that I'm hopeless. It's that my hope took an incredible blow on Friday, because yet again, Canada never fails to disappoint in the treatment of Indigenous peoples. We continually are treated as states, wards of the state, second-class citizens minus. And it's very difficult to have those kind of conversations with your children. That, for me, is one of the hardest parts of this.
Dr. Sinclair, we see the Prime Minister meeting with the family, the Justice Minister speaking out, premiers, universities weighing in on this case. What would it take beyond talk for this to be a watershed moment for change in Canada?
Political will. Really, there needs to be grand, wide-scale, and fundamental political will to be able to change the structural challenges that face us. Every time that we talk about changing the role of Indigenous peoples in these countries, in the country, or the partnership Indigenous peoples share with the country, what comes up time and time again is it's too difficult, it's too deep, it's too hard. And I agree with all those things. Yes, it is too difficult. Yes, it is too deep. Yes, it involves structural change on a fundamental and, yes, constitutional level. That is a word that Canada freaks out about, is nervous about, but unfortunately that's truly what's going to be the only thing that's really going to change, is to have a fundamental constitutional discussion around how Indigenous peoples are viewed in the country, how we are partners in the country. We're not wards.
And maybe this is the new start of that. I want to ask quickly, about 30 seconds. There are people watching at home, many from the majority population. I mean, what can they actually do to support the Aboriginal community in Canada right now?
Oh, I think it's very easy. I have hundreds of people that sit into my classes or spend time, but I'm not alone. I'm sure, many Canadians, it's almost impossible to ignore discussions around Indigenous issues. Talking, reading, engaging with somebody who's competent to be able to deal with those things, and then going out to those coffee shops, going out to those libraries, going to those groups, and sharing those discussions, because there are many people that will never come to my class or never have a conversation with me. So I employ Canadians, when you do get that knowledge of what it means to have 150 years of genocide and violence, to share that, talk about it, and confront the ignorance that results in the murder of Colton Boushie.
Yes, integrated conversations to move forward. Dr. Sinclair, thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Miigwech, thank you very much.
That was Dr. Negan Sinclair from the University of Manitoba. And coming up on Lorna's Snapshot, Indigenous Anglican Bishop Mark McDonald on healing in a tragedy that shattered lives on all sides. That is next.
Billionaire Elon Musk and his SpaceX program successfully launched one of his red-hot Tesla Roadsters into space, destined for Mars. We delve into the new frontier of private space travel. That's coming soon on Context.
Canadians across the country continue to wrestle through the verdict of the Boushie-Stanley case. Bishop Mark McDonald is the National Indigenous Anglican Bishop. Bishop, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
How might our spiritual lives be active in this tragic case?
I believe that what we are witnessing is the unveiling, the revealing of a deep systemic evil in our society. And it is, I think, a moral and spiritual problem as well as a political and legal problem. I think that people of spirit and conscience are necessarily concerned with the outworkings of this very complex and difficult evil. Again, I would describe it as systemic evil, what in the New Testament is described as the principalities and powers. The way those things deeply affect people and the way they relate, oftentimes in a way that is hidden and assumed, but not consciously.
And now that it is not hidden, we're seeing it all through this tragic case. What's your advice for the way forward with our spiritual strength as treaty people?
Well, I think that we are advised that the living God has effectively addressed the principalities and powers in Christ. And the lifestyle of peace and reconciliation, which is advised for us as Christian people, but in humanity as a whole, is the only way forward. I think that there is an element of awareness, of spiritual discernment in identifying where the evils are and how they impact us. But I think that the most important aspect is to try to recover our humanity. The humanity that is lost in the midst of systemic evil like this.
All right. Bishop Mark McDonald, I'm sure your journeys through our Indigenous churches are going to be very helpful in the days ahead. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
That was Bishop Mark McDonald, the National Indigenous Anglican Bishop. He joined us from Toronto. And that is it for Context. Be sure to read more about this case on our website and find out how we all can be part of being treaty people who are healers of this great nation. Thank you for joining us.